Let's look at the other parts to example 1, parts C through F. In part C, they've asked us to find the value of f of g inverse of 0. So I really want to start by finding g inverse of 0. So g inverse of 0 is equal to, and we have to look back to part B. And we see in part B that g inverse of 0 was 1, and so g inverse of 0 is 1. And since I'm looking for f of g inverse of 0, that's going to be f of 1. And again, let's look back at our table. And f of 1 is negative 1. All right, so take a moment, pause the video, and why don't you complete part D? This is kind of hard to read here, but this should be f inverse of f of negative 1. So take a minute and see if you can do that, and then we'll come back in a moment and check your work. In part D, the input for f inverse is f of negative 1. And so let's find out what f of negative 1 is. So again, we'll go back and look at our table. And so f of negative 1 is equal to 4. And so what we're looking for is f inverse of 4. Again, we can see in part A that f inverse of 4 is negative 1. Now this is interesting. Notice that the f inverse of f of negative 1 gave me negative 1. And this is kind of what we expect to happen with inverse functions, is that they undo themselves. So let's take a look at E and take a moment, pause the video, and work this out, and we'll come back and check. See you in a minute. So in part E, we're going to begin by finding g inverse of negative 1. So g inverse of negative 1 is equal to, and if you look back at your table on the previous page, g inverse of negative 1 is equal to 3. Now we're going to find f inverse of 3, and f inverse of 3 is not defined. What? F inverse of 3. Notice that 3 is not in the domain for f inverse. And so what that means, therefore, f inverse of g inverse of negative 1 is undefined. All right. Now f actually works, so take a moment, pause the video, work f, we'll come back and check. All right, in part F of example 1, we're asked to find g inverse of f inverse of 4. We'll begin by finding f inverse of 4. Now, looking back at your table, f inverse of 4 is negative 1, and g inverse of negative 1 is 3.